Happy fucking Wednesday, everybody. You know, I was thinking last night about how I actually like doing this podcast on Wednesdays. It was really just an accident the way that it happened. I didn't set out to do that, but I've just fallen into a rhythm. And when you do these things, you have to have it. You have to have a rhythm established, and you kind of have to do it the same way every week, or else it doesn't get done. And so, for just sort of by accident, I started doing these on Wednesdays. And it's hard because it kind of takes up my whole Wednesday. I have to get up in the morning and record, and then I go to work and do my whole day. And then when I come home at night, I edit it and get it up on Wednesday night. And that's the rhythm that I've fallen into. And I keep telling myself that maybe I'll record it earlier on Sunday so that I can give myself more time. And then it never happens. But actually, now that I've done it this way for the last month or so, I've started to like it. And the reason that I like it is that I think that Wednesday is a hard day to be creative. I think that Wednesday is a hard day to keep focus of your goals. What happens a lot over the years, at least in my case, as I'm working my day job and living my regular life, but trying to be a creative on the side, trying to be an artist, trying to make stuff, is that inevitably, Saturdays and Sundays are the best because I'll get excited, I'll have time, I'll work on my projects, and then, I can carry that momentum through Monday morning. I wake up and I haven't been thinking about work ever since Friday, so I've got, 3 days of momentum where I'm working for myself as a writer or as a podcaster, and that's really exciting. But then you get back into the grind, and Monday work happens, and then you have to go to the grocery store, and then you have to whatever. Everyone has their stuff that keeps them busy. And so by the time Wednesday comes around, you're sort of dragging, you're sort of in the flow, you're starting to get tired from the week, and it's hard to, wake up early on a Wednesday morning and remember that you're a creative. It's hard to remember your true self, man. It makes me think of this thing, where was it? I forget which book it's in, but it's in one of the Jack Kerouac books where he's sitting around with his friends and they're all young and idealistic, and they're exploring Buddhism and all the surrounding thoughts of Buddhism, and they come up with this phrase, which is, I think it's an old Buddhist scripture, but it's, remember the face you had before you were born. I think that's it. Remember the face you had before you were born. I've always liked that phrase. I think in the Buddhist sense, the phrase is trying to speak to the fact that there's something outside of this life. Buddhism is all about suffering. The major truths are about how life is suffering, and you can escape, whatever. I'm not gonna fucking. I don't know anything about Buddhism, but it makes sense from a Buddhist standpoint that this life is not all we had, and so it connects you to something universal. That's what I'm trying to say. Connects you to something that whatever was true about you before you came into this life, and whatever will be true about you after you leave this life, it speaks to this idea that there is more, that maybe there are other lives, or at the very least, that there's something in you that's godlike or universal or persistent or spiritual that was here before you were here and will be here after you're gone. But I like it. Remember the face you had before you were born. I like it from a sort of creative and artistic standpoint, that there's something in you that is true and universal, and whatever you're trying to do as a creative is you're trying to connect with that. I see this. This is true for so many artists that I follow and love. I see with my wife, who's always working on her stuff. This is what she's always trying to do, and I feel like this is what I'm trying to do with my writing, is to get all the bullshit out of the way and to reconnect with whatever I feel most strongly about, whatever is true. I've thought a lot about this. I've written before about how I'm trying to write the novel that my 9-year-old self would be proud of, or the novel that my 9-year-old self never finished, or the idea that what I'm trying to do, I actually owe it to my kid self to become a writer, because there's that sort of magic and innocence that you have when you're young, when you imagine that you'll do these things. And it's innocence. Innocence in all of its forms is obviously that innocence has good connotations and bad connotations, and innocence is purity, but innocence is also ignorance, because you just don't know. When you're young, you just don't know, and so you can't know. So the goals that you have for yourself, they can't be realistic, and that's the foible of it, and it's also the beauty of it, is that you're innocent. You don't know any better. And part of the trick, and I think the magic, the thing that I love so much about successful authors and artists, is that they are able to keep coming back and reconnecting to their childhood selves, and reconnecting to not just the happiness, but also the pains that they feel most deeply. And I think there has to be something, I feel like there should be something healthy about that, or inherently good about that, that creative people are in touch with themselves. And so I guess to bring this thought back around, what I'm saying about Wednesdays is that maybe the way it goes in the cycle of the week, the spiritual cycle of the week, the metaphysical cycle of your week, the way it goes is on a Saturday morning or Saturday afternoon, you might feel most like yourself. You might remember the face you had before you were born, when you're hiking with your family, or when you're sprawled out on the sofa just doing whatever it is that you want to do, or when you're playing games with your friends. But then later on, as the week goes on, you get caught up in, sort of, I guess you would say the ego takes over. If you think about it in Freudian terms, is that the ego has to say, the ego has to speak to that person who's laying on the couch and daydreaming and reading books and having fun hiking, and to say, hey, it's fucking time to work, time to put food on the table. It's time to make money. It's time to take out the trash. It's time to pay the bills. It's time to pick up the groceries. It's time to pick up the kids from school. And the ego is important. And it is important to do those things. And you have to function, and you have to go through your life. And I think what's happened as I've gotten a little bit older is that I used to have disdain for those things. I think the sort of the naivety of the young creative, or just the young person, is that, it's easy to want to have all the fun all the time. It's sort of an immaturity, I guess, as you want to have all the good stuff all the time. You want to have all the sex and the fun in the relationship without any of the hard work of the arguments. And you want to have a vacation all the time without any of the hard work that pays for the vacation. And you want to have creative outbursts all the time you want to be, healthy without putting in the work of going to the gym every morning. And I do think I spent a lot of my young creative life, having an immature resentment for the average workday and the things that it takes to get through life. And what I really wanted to do was just avoid responsibilities, but I cloaked that in this, shroud of saying, I want to live to the fullest. I want to go on adventures. But really, I was just wanting to have my cake and eat it too. I've never really understood that expression, but I think I used it right there. And I doubt that I'm alone or special in those feelings that I had. And I think that's just part of growing up and taking on responsibility. But what I think is interesting about it from an artistic standpoint is as you get a little older, you start to appreciate the cycle more and respect the cycle and respect that both are important, and then you can't have just one or the other. Maybe I'm making a false dichotomy here, but I guess the two ends of the spectrum that I'm sort of holding up here, or that I'm weighing on the scale, is one side, which you would say is the unconscious side or the creative side or the free side, and then the untethered part of your personality and your life and the freedom. And then on the other side you have the responsible side, you have the ego, the tied down, the disciplined side. And I think when I was a mature person and a seasoned person, and just to talk about creatives, people who, someone like Stephen King, who goes through his life having these creative outbursts, but also just living as a normal person, as a family man. People who find a way to actually responsibly do both and nurture both sides, all parts of their personality. That's health, that's balance. And so it's good to have a respect for both sides of the coin, and to understand as you get older, just understand that you do need both. And you can't have one dominating the other, and you can't be out of balance. But now I realize I'm getting a little vague here, so let me bring it back and get specific again. Well, okay, before I get specific, let me say one more general thing. There's this quote that I really like that maybe I read in Stephen King's On Writing. It's a quote that I've heard writers throw around, and the quote goes something like, the purpose of your actual life is not to support your creative life, but it's the other way around. The purpose of your creative life is to support your actual life. And I'm sure I just butchered that. I feel like I'm always just butchering quotes on here, because when I have a podcast, I'm actually talking, and it's different from writing where you would pause and look something up. So I'm doing it in real time. So forgive me if I butcher every other quote that I say. But the idea is that whatever you do for your creative work, your life isn't built to support. Your life isn't just a structure or a support system to support your creativity. So it's not that your family is bending over backwards to set things up for you to be a creative. It's the exact opposite. It's the idea that if you have your creative space and you do that well, the idea is that is going to make you a better person, and you're going to be more balanced, and you're going to be more well-rounded, and you're going to actually be able to go into your life, go into Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday, and do a better job of making money and being a family person and being responsible and helping your friends and doing all the things in your community that you should be doing. And I really like that idea, because I think it speaks to a mature and balanced perspective, and it combats that sort of naive or innocent idea that everything should support my creativity, and all of life's needs should bow down to my creative pursuits. That's something that I maybe I used to think or maybe I used to feel, and I realize now that it was just a mask for wanting to avoid responsibilities and just be on vacation all the time, which is fine to, or maybe normal to think that way when you're young. And now, these days, I'm more interested. All right, I'm bringing it all back around now. These days, I'm more interested in sort of the balance and the ebb and flow of doing your creative work and also living your life, and this idea that your creative work actually supports your life and bolsters your life and makes your life better. And that's why I'm interested in this back and forth give and take that's always going on with my writing and everything else that's going on in my life. And it's just the little things that matter and that count, because those are the things you're actually doing every day. So it may sound boring, it may sound silly, but it's actually really important to me that I do these podcasts on Wednesdays, and I've just decided to roll with that now. And it's better to, it's better for you guys, for anyone who's listening, to know what to expect and always know what to get. And so I'm just going to stick to that as Wednesdays, because I don't know, maybe there's something about my personality or my brand or what I'm putting out there. I really like the idea that, let's take an hour or two on a Wednesday morning to refocus, to remember that face you had before you were born, and then do your work, connect with yourself, have your peace, have your mindset, whatever it is that you do, and then go back out and into the world and be better, be a better employee, be a better wife and husband and son and daughter, and be happier, and be responsible, whatever. What am I talking about? I want to talk about my story, and in talking about my story, I want to talk about other stories, because that's what I do on this show, is that I talk about stories. I've realized these last couple weeks, as I brainstorm my story and work on plotting and outlining, that I've always, ever since I've had this vision for this Tomorrow City universe, that I keep fighting this battle back and forth. There's a battle between my desire to write epic fantasy and then my shift and my decision to write urban fantasy. And I realized that I've suffered from flip-flopping back and forth without realizing it. While I'm outlining, I'll get excited about an idea and I'll go in a direction that's way more epic fantasy, and then I'll have another idea and I'll go in another direction that's way more urban fantasy. So let me get specific and so let me talk specifics. So one of my biggest inspiration for urban fantasy has been the Dresden Files series. The author is Jim Butcher. The main character is Harry Dresden, and he's a wizard detective. So he works in Chicago. He's a wizard. He solves crimes. It's awesome, just detective novels. It's in the style of what do you call it? Police procedural, or just detective novels, murder mysteries. My favorite one that I always love to go back and read are the Philip Marlowe books. Raymond Chandler is the author, and it's just the hard-boiled crime detective stories where he's drinking whiskey in his office and a beautiful blonde bombshell walks in and she has a stolen necklace, or there's a murder and now he needs to go solve this crime, and he's just going around LA and Hollywood and getting beat up by gangsters and sniffing out leads and always getting himself into trouble, and in the end he's the private dick who solves the crime that the cops can't figure out. So there's a long history of these sort of novels, and people love that style. And what's so awesome about what Jim Butcher did, which is why he's one of the godfathers of urban fantasy, is that he took that idea and that genre and he just added supernatural beings, and his main character is a detective, is a private dick who's down on his luck, and has to take odd jobs to make money. But the catch is that he's a wizard, and so he does magic, and magic helps him solve his crimes. And so he's the main character, Harry Dresden. He's doing the same thing. He's at the beginning of every story, there's a murder, there's some sort of mystery. He's in his office, somebody walks in, presents him with a case. He has to take the case because he needs money. So now he's running around Chicago and getting beat up by gangsters, and getting into trouble with vampire prostitute ringleaders, and getting chased by werewolves, whatever happens to him. And what's really fun about these stories, what I'm really interested in is the structure and how they work. And with Harry Dresden, and the same with Philip Marlowe, what you have is a sort of James Bond hero. I forget there's a term for this kind of hero, but what is it? I've heard writers explain this before, and I forget what they call it, but there's a term for this sort of protagonist who doesn't really change. So when you watch a James Bond movie, you always get the action. There's some new story every time there's a James Bond movie, but James Bond doesn't go through some big character arc. He doesn't have real love interests. He doesn't have real family ties. He's not actually changing. We don't want him to change. We just want to see James Bond doing his thing. And that sort of hero is really good for a serial. It's really good for a story that can just repeat, rinse and repeat. And it makes a lot of sense, especially with crime novels and detective novels, because you have the same detective, you have the same protagonist, and the structure of each story is just that they have a new case to solve. So the story starts when the protagonist gets a new case, so when there's a murder, and then they go about solving this case, and the story ends when the murder is solved. I talked a few weeks ago about Craig Johnson and the Longmire Westerns, same format there. Agatha Christie, any of the great crime writers, go back, it's all the same. It's tried and true formula. So I like these stories. I like how they work in urban fantasy. It's fun because you can take a sort of tried and true genre and add a supernatural twist to it and have magic in the city, and it can be a new take on an old whatever, a new trick for an old dog, a new take on an old system that works. So I've been thinking about that, and I've been thinking that makes a lot of sense. It makes sense, rational sense, for my stories and my universe, because as I talked about a few weeks back with Craig Johnson and the Longmire novels, what I'd love to do is create this Tomorrow City universe and make an interesting world, an interesting setting, and then be able to write lots of different stories within that world. And that goes in contrast to the typical epic fantasy. The way epic fantasy goes is normally you have a trilogy. Okay, so I guess I'm talking about the difference between serial novels, ones where you have a hero who's not changing and you can rinse and repeat, and you can write, theoretically, like James Bond, you can write endless stories in this universe and with this hero. And I like that because I'd like to create this world that I can keep writing in and keep writing in. But I'm also tied to epic fantasy, and that's what I love, and those are the roots that I come from. And so if you think about Lord of the Rings, your heroes are changing, and there's this great quest, and the great quest is going to end. And then it's not like you can pick up and tell a different story about Gandalf. Whatever you tell, whatever sort of, you can't have Gandalf solving a mystery, or Gandalf's love life, or Frodo coming back home. Nobody cares. because what we're interested in is this epic quest. And so the quest starts, and then it's going to build and build and build, and the battles get bigger and bigger, and the stakes get higher and higher, and then the trilogy is over. And that's how epic fantasies tend to go. Same with Game of Thrones. It's another easy example. What you have is these tensions that are rising in the world, and as the series goes on, the tensions get higher and higher, and the battles get worse and worse, and then finally at the end we're having the Night King and the ice zombies have finally come over the wall, and finally that fight is going to happen, and finally Daenerys is going to fight Cersei, and it's the biggest, the last who's who of who's standing, and then it's all over. And then you can't just go and write. In the Game of Thrones universe, they can do spinoffs. You can tell stories in Westeros that happen before or after, like you could follow along with Arya's story. But if you do that, there's that scene at the end of Game of Thrones, the TV show, where Arya is sailing off into the sunset. So you could pick up her story, but if you do that, what you're going to be doing is telling a new quest, a new epic quest with Arya. So she's going to go on adventures, and then her arc is going to follow that same epic fantasy arc, I guess is the best word for it. So I feel torn between these two kind of approaches, and I'd like to write this sort of rinse and repeat hero. Like I like the detective novels, and I'd like to write a hero like that, but it's like I can't just do it. At some point I get bored with it, or some point I feel like there should be more. At some point I feel like the hero should be chosen or destined or preordained to be the hero, and I keep writing into my outline these arcs that are rising and rising, and I realize that, okay, now what I'm doing is more of a epic fantasy style. And then also I want to tell my hero's origin story, and so that also is more of an epic fantasy slant, where you start from the beginning. With Harry Potter, you start Harry Potter is interesting because that's the thing about genre, is they're all blended together, and whatever boundaries you can draw, those boundaries can be blurred and can be changed. So Harry Potter is urban fantasy in the sense that it's modern day fantasy, and there's the regular world, there's London and regular people, and then there's magic behind the scenes. That's a very critical urban fantasy trope, is that there is magic and there is a wizarding world, but it's behind the scenes. It's just behind the veil. And that's fun because we like to imagine that as regular people, maybe we could stumble into that. Maybe we could be like Harry and we get a letter one day from Hogwarts saying that we've been chosen to attend the school. But I would say in Harry Potter, in the scope and the arc of the stories, it is epic, very much epic fantasy, in the sense that you have a hero, a chosen hero, and you have a dark lord, and the hero and the dark lord are pitted together. And the sort of story arc of the very first Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, is that Harry comes to Hogwarts, and really you get the first hint of Voldemort. So you get the first hint of that great evil that's lurking in the darkness. And at the end of that first story, Voldemort is sort of this weird half-form, what do you call it, symbiotic, or he's like a virus. He's like attached to that professor's head. He's like a parasite. Voldemort is like a parasite who's just sucking up unicorn's blood and has to live out in someone else's body to survive. So that's just the beginning. And that whole first story is kind of just, it really sets up the conflict. And we learn the story that Voldemort killed Harry's parents, and that he tried to kill Harry, but Harry survived, and now he has the scar. It's so beautiful and so perfect. Of course, I don't have to talk about how great Harry Potter is. But my point is that the epic fantasy arc, it's all right there from the first story. From the very beginning, we realize that Harry is the chosen hero, and we realize that there's a darkness that's brewing, and Voldemort, what's so great about it is that Voldemort is not powerful, but he's working on it. And Harry is not powerful, but he's working on it. And over the course of the next 7 novels, the hero and the villain are going to gain power, and it's all leading to the great conflict. And then when the great conflict finally happens, then the story has to be over. There's nothing else. That's the epic fantasy quest, the epic fantasy arc, so that it's all building and building until the last battle. And then when it's over, it's not like you can just pick up and tell a mystery story with Harry, or pick up with Ron and Hermione and tell some sort of romance story or chase thriller story or whatever genre you can imagine. Nobody cares, or it would be a letdown if that happened. It wouldn't match at all. It doesn't sync up. So what you can do if you're J.K. Rowling is you can take that universe that you've created and then you can spin it off into a new direction, which is what they did with Fantastic Beasts. So now you're taking your universe that you've created and you're changing the settings. So you're going back in time and then you're going to America. So now instead of being in London, you're going to America, and you're also going, they went back in time, right? It's earlier. Harry Potter is modern day London, but Fantastic Beasts is like 1950s America, right? And then you can tell a new story, a new epic fantasy quest that centers around Newt. I think Newt's his name. And whatever dark force is brewing, who's now Johnny Depp. I think I fell asleep in the second Magical Beast when I tried to watch it. The second Fantastic Beasts. I feel like that story also, just quick side note, I feel like the Fantastic Beasts series, the first one was great. The second one, there's just so much going on. It's like it suffers from being too grand, from scaling up too hard and not spending enough time with its hero. I feel like the story is just getting bigger and bigger. It's like the same thing that happened to Game of Thrones at the end, where it's like, I'm not really invested in any one character because these battles and fun, these amazing magical scenes are just getting there's so much action. It doesn't have the sort of homegrown, natural, really hard-hitting character development that you feel in Harry Potter. When you watch those early Harry Potter movies, you just feel so connected to them. You know exactly who your favorite people are and what their quirks are. Fantastic Beasts has a great character. Well, Newt, he's quirky, but he's not lovable in the same way because he's so kind of quirky, I guess, and closed off. Anyways, I'm still going to watch Fantastic Beasts. It's still really fun. And you can't expect that it's going to be as good as Harry Potter because nothing actually is. Nothing is the same unless you're talking about the greatest of the greats. I'm still going to watch it, but the second one I just fell asleep in. So, all of that to say, I have felt this tension back and forth, and I keep trying to plot my stories, and I keep trying to decide exactly who my hero is, and then I go back and forth. Well, should I start with the origin story, or no, maybe I should just do it because I'm trying to do an urban fantasy. Maybe I should just do it more like the Dresden Files, and we don't give a fuck about the origin story. We just you start in the character's regular life. The detective is sitting in his office and a new client comes in. And you can sprinkle in bits of origin story and character development and history throughout the story, but what's more important is the actual mystery that's being solved in this one novel. So I've been going back and forth on that a lot. And as I've talked about genre and writing to market this last couple of weeks, I've been thinking more about that. And I've also sort of realized that this is what's happening, is that I can't figure out exactly what I'm doing. And that's why I'm leaning into this write to market and know your genre ideas, because I'm trying to narrow down and just pinpoint exactly what I'm doing so that I can move forward, because I've been in this stalemate of ideas and options and brainstorming, and I'm trying to not the whole purpose of this whole podcast is I'm trying to stop being the writer who only talks about writing and become an actual author. That's the point. That's the goal. So I think I have found a solution to this problem of, is it urban fantasy? Is it epic fantasy? How can I marry the two or blend the two? What am I actually doing here? And I think I've found a solution, or at least one that'll help me move forward, and who knows, maybe it'll change in the future. So the solution is this. Here's what I've decided as of maybe 2 days ago. Yesterday I was writing all these notes and getting excited. And what I think I'm going to say, I think I'm going to try and take aspects of both. Obviously, I'm interested in urban fantasy. Obviously, I can't stop my brain from creating these big epic fantasy quests. And so I'm not going to pigeon myself into one or the other. I'm going to try and think of a good way to blend them. And here's how I think I can do it. There's two TV series that I'm going to use as my inspiration. One is an old TV series called Life, and one is a TV series called Mad Dogs. Now, I've talked about Mad Dogs before. It's only a couple years old, but it's one of the greatest TV series I've ever watched, and I really respect it because the writers wrote this one beautiful work of art season, and then when the television network propositioned the writers and said, hey, we like your show, let's do a second season, but we need you to make these changes, the writers said, no, we're happy with what we did. We think if we forced the second season, it would just kind of butcher the story. And I think that's fucking amazing, and I wish more TV series would do that. And that was like the fuck you to the industry, and it was like the holding up the artist's holy grail that we've created this product and we don't want it to be spoiled by commerce. And so now there's just that one series, or the one season of Mad Dogs, and it's perfect. It has a strong beginning. It's awesome. I would recommend it to anybody, and the ending is perfect. I was thinking about Mad Dogs earlier in the year when people were griping about Game of Thrones having a bad ending. Well, if you want to see how a TV series can end well and perfectly and wrap up everything and just have the perfect ending that you knew was coming but you still didn't expect, Mad Dogs did it. And that's why I love it. The other TV series I mentioned is Life. And Life was like 10 years, it came out like 10 years ago. So if you look at the videos now, it looks kind of dorky and like 90s-ish, even though it was actually like 2008 or whatever. But the main character is Damian Lewis, who I love, badass actor. Right now he's in Billions. He was the Homeland star. Now he's the star of Billions. Basically, he's the star of whatever show he's acting in. Damian Lewis is the man. And he has this series. Maybe if you love Homeland and you love Billions, maybe you don't know that there was this series called Life where he was the star of this. He's a policeman in this TV series. And it went 2 or maybe 3 seasons, but this was, I just talked about how Mad Dogs had the perfect season 1 and they ended it and then it was over and it was just beautiful. Well, Life did the opposite. They made the exact, they failed where Mad Dogs succeeded, in that they had a great premise, they had a great first season, but then they tried to carry it on and it just got lost. It just got bad. They just kept they kept the season going. And I don't know all the specifics, but it's obvious when you watch it is the show starts out so strong and it has a really good first season. But then once you get into the second season, you're like, I don't really buy it. It's kind of like the story. It was never meant to go that long. They told, there's this thing, writers always say that, people say, how long should my story be? Well, the story needs to be how long the story needs to be is really the only correct answer that you can give. A story shouldn't be any certain length. The story shouldn't be any certain amount of words, shouldn't be any amount of pages, shouldn't be any amount of novels. It should be the exact amount of time, no more, no less, that you need to tell that story. So if the story is about you going to the grocery store and finding zucchinis on sale, then that story needs to start when you go to the grocery store and then end after you find the zucchinis on sale. And if the story is about this terrible ex-boyfriend that you had, well, maybe the story can start with all of your past relationships, but then when you build up to the whatever, that's a stupid example. In a thriller, there's this is what genre does so well. This is why genre is important, both for readers and for marketers, is that when I pick up a romance novel, I know the story is going to begin around the time when these two love interests meet. And then I get to go through the roller coaster ride of how all relationships happen, that tense and weird but also beautiful time where they're getting to know each other, and then their truth comes out, and then they get angry at each other, and then in the end they get together. You have the happy ending. The story's over. We don't want to go to the honeymoon. We don't want to go to the 10-year reunion. That story's over. When you're telling a murder mystery, the murder mystery starts when there's a crime, and then whenever we find out who committed that crime, that story's over. So Life. There were two reasons why I loved Life. One is because of the story structure. Two is because Damian Lewis is the man, and he, in the series, he just loves fruit. His character is awesome and enigmatic and weird, like all of his main characters are. And he's always eating fruit in every scene, which is just genius and weird and fun when you're watching it. So here's how the story's structured. So Damian Lewis is a cop. He gets framed for a murder. So he's a cop, he's on the force, he's an investigator, there's some murder that happens, he gets framed. He goes to prison for life. That's why the show is called Life. Everyone turns on him, his fellow cops. He was framed very well. Everyone thinks that Damian Lewis is the murderer. They think he killed this young girl, whatever. I forget all the details, but he's a bad cop. So he goes to jail. They show all these clips of him getting the shit kicked out of him in jail because I guess nobody likes a crooked cop. I don't know if that's true or if that's just the way it is in movies. Anyways, the way the story starts is that he gets out of prison. So evidence comes to light that he was actually framed. He wasn't actually responsible. So he spends 12 years in prison based off a crime that he didn't commit. And over that 12 years, everyone turns on him because his friends, his old partners, they know that he went crooked, so they move on. They don't like him anymore. His wife, obviously they got divorced, and she started a new life and has a new family now. And she has thought this whole time that her ex-husband was a murderer. So everything's moved on without him. He's been in prison, and he's been a murderer in the world's eyes. Well, suddenly, it's a great premise. Like, it's just fun. As I'm saying this, I'm like, yeah, this is a fucking awesome story idea. So the way it starts is he gets exonerated, new evidence comes to light, he gets out of jail. So 12 years later, this is the beginning. This is the way the series starts. He gets out of jail. He's a free man. And now he's in this weird situation where everyone thought he was a bad guy for 12 years. They've moved on without him. But now he's coming back into the real world and has to deal with the fact that his wife has a new family, and all of his coworkers are kind of like, they don't know how to feel about him because suddenly they are being told that he's innocent, but they've spent the last decade mistrusting him and not liking him. So it's very strange. So here's how here's how each episode is structured. It's really fun. Damian Lewis, he comes back on the force. He's a cop, and the story is structured just like any cop, just like any show. NCIS, CSI, Bones, whatever those detective stories are. It's the same. Damian Lewis is back on the force. He's a cop. At the beginning of every episode, there's a murder, there's a crime, whatever happens, and then over the next 40 minutes, Damian Lewis and his buddy cop, they solve the crime. And when the crime is over, that episode is over. But there's this very fun and very interesting global story that's going on in the background, which is that Damian Lewis, the whole time, he's trying to figure out who framed him. He's trying to figure out why he spent the last 12 years in prison. He's trying to figure out, who's the bastard that framed me, who actually committed the murders that I was framed for. So really there's two stories operating at any moment during this series, Life. And it's really fun because the structure of each episode is that they have a crime to solve, but in the background, Damian Lewis is kind of going rogue and also trying to solve his own personal mystery. So it's much more gripping, much more powerful, and much more interesting than just your average NCIS show, because there's this global story where he's trying to find redemption and also revenge. It's really a revenge plot. He's trying to figure out who framed him and made him spend the last 12 years in jail. So that's tense and interesting all along the way. And then you also have just the regular fun, the present moment crime that's being solved. I've always remembered that. I loved that show. I thought it was really smart how they had the A story and the B story operating at the same time, and how they weaved in and out of those two stories. So Damian Lewis might be in the evidence room when he's supposed to be working on the whatever murder of the day it is, but he kind of goes off procedure and starts looking through old files from his case. So he's kind of using his position as a cop to privately research his own case. So he's juggling both at the same time. It's really, really good. I recommend the first season, not the second. So I was thinking about that. I was thinking about Life. I was thinking about Dresden Files and, the wizard detective. And I thought, why don't I if I can do some sort of series like Life, maybe if I think about my stories as a TV series, then I can have my cake and eat it too, maybe. Maybe this is just wishful thinking, but I'm thinking that I can have my werewolf detective in Tomorrow City, where I can have a number of novels where each novel he has a new mystery to solve. But in the background, I can also be telling the arc of his origin story, which is crescendoing into some great battle at the end he's going to have, which lets me build in these epic fantasy tropes and plots that I want to use. The trope of the chosen hero and the destined hero, and also the villain, whatever the dark force that is opposing the antagonist, that's opposing the protagonist, that can be introduced in the first story like Voldemort was in the first Harry Potter, but just on it's just an introduction. and then that can build and build until the end. And I don't know, maybe I can write, obviously this is a new idea, I don't have it all worked out, but maybe I can write 4 novels in this series. Maybe I can write 10 novels in this series and think about it like a 10 episode TV series, and then it can end. And then I can use these urban fantasy tropes of having this, sort of werewolf detective, which is urban fantasy of a supernatural creature who's working a regular job, and that's fun. And then at the same time, he's trying to. I've always liked life, and I've always appreciated that plot, and I always thought it would be fun to write something like that. I don't know, I guess just because that's kind of how I feel like my own life is. Like, it resonates with me because I'm at work doing these things, but I also have my own motives, and I'm trying to push my own character arc forward and solve the problems in my own life, and I'm trying to juggle these two plots in my own life where I have to be at work doing these things and doing whatever is important to the day, but also I don't know. But so that's my thought. That's where I'm at this week, is maybe I can do, quote unquote, here's the elevator pitch, life meets Harry Dresden, or life meets Jim Butcher. Life meets the Dresden Files, which that would be a terrible elevator pitch because nobody remembers life. And, well, Dresden Files, any urban fantasy fan loves Dresden Files. I don't know. I'll work on my elevator pitch another time. But that's where I'm at. So this week, I'm going to go forward with this idea that I'll write a series of novels that will tell the story of Sal Paradise, who's the werewolf detective. He's not exactly a detective. He's kind of like a private dick, but he's a detective for hire who's taking shitty jobs, and he's not the real qualified detective. But he's doing his own thing on the underground and getting his hard knocks, just like Philip Marlowe did, and Harry Dresden, and all the good private dicks who came before him. And at the same time, he's trying to solve his own mystery of what happened to him, why he's in Tomorrow City, and finding the true nature of the antagonist that's opposing him and leading up to that global battle. I'm going to work on plotting that this week. I'm going to be writing bits of that story and hopefully gaining momentum. I'll report back next Wednesday. Thank you so much for listening. If you've made it this far, I don't even know what to say. Thanks for going along with this trip with me and these ramblings. This is just the stuff that I love, that I nerd out on, and I love to talk about this stuff, and I don't ever want to stop talking about this stuff. So it's been fun. I hope you enjoyed it. Happy Wednesday. Be well. And I promise I will be back next week with more.